Welcome back, and in this tutorial we're going to cover a very common obstacle that you find in 2D side-scroller games, and that is spikes and spike traps. We have this jump right here, and say you fall down this jump. Right now nothing will happen. You get to the bottom, you can't jump out of this. This is a pretty far jump, so let's have it kill you when you get to the bottom. And to do that, let's make some spikes that are here at the bottom, and these spikes will sort of impale you. For the spikes, I'm actually going to use icicles. So I'm going to open up my prop gallery. I'm going to type in icicle right here. Because turned upside down, these icicles look a lot like spikes. Let's turn on snap to grid. And let's rotate these obstacles. And let's also increase them. So I'm going to increase the scale up to pretty large, 200%. And then I'm going to rotate this upside down. First thing I want to do actually is these are blue, so they look like icicles. Let's change the color of these by going to Properties, Appearance, and let's change all of these to a dark grayish color. That way it looks a bit more metallic, more like spikes than icicles. That's looking pretty good. And let's also put a few of these next to each other. So I'm going to take a second one, and I'm going to rotate this around on the y-axis, so therefore we get a somewhat amount of variety here. Rotate this again. And we're going to do one more. Now, say I want to have all these together as one spike trap. I can do that with the glue tool. I'm going to hit A, and you're going to see this option for Edit, Multi-Edit, Power, and Attach. Let's use the Multi-Edit tool. So I'm going to click A again to select that. And now with the Multi-Edit tool, I can select multiple objects. I'm going to select this object with the right trigger, this one, and this one. I'm going to hold right bumper, and I'm going to choose the Y option to glue these objects together. Now I'm going to go back to the Edit tool, and what you're going to see is all of these now move as one. These are now all glued together as just one prop, which is perfect, because I want these all to be kind of part of the same spike trap. Let's make sure that's lined up with our pathway. Looks like that is. And look at that, that's looking pretty intimidating. That's something I wouldn't really want to fall in. Next thing I want to do is I want to set up a trigger zone for this, so it detects when you get in the trigger zone and will kill your character. Let's go to Edit, Properties, Brain, Sensors, and turn on this trigger zone. And let's grab this gizmo. One thing that was pointed out to me is the fact that if you are on keyboard mouse, you don't have access to a controller. You also don't have access to changing the X, Y, and Z scales here. My recommendation for those people who don't have access to a controller, just have keyboard mouse. You know, there are a lot of things that controller will give you that keyboard mouse can't, with just different options. It's also great to program for. Controller is the typical input of people playing in Project Spark, so it's good to test out a controller and see how things work on it. But also, controllers are pretty cheap nowadays. You just need a Xbox 360, Xbox One, or Windows controller. Plug that into your machine, and it'll do all the rest. Everything will be automatically set up for you. It'll understand you have a controller input, and you'll be able to use that pretty much almost right away inside of Project Spark. So you might want to just look at possibly getting a controller. If you can't, and you really want to stick with just keyboard mouse, then instead of trigger zones that you'll be able to edit with controller, you might want to go for something like a detect sensor. So let's go to Properties, Brain, Sensors, and choose Detect Sensor. And the detect sensor is something that you'll be able to scale down with keyboard mouse. So let's grab this gizmo here. And we can then bring this down and have this kind of be our new sensor. Now, it's not as perfect as a trigger zone, right? Because the trigger zone, you can choose how tall it is, where exactly it is, while the detect area is just going to be a circle kind of around the central point of the object. So this tutorial does assume that you do have access to a controller, so you are able to change out this trigger zone. And if you are able to, it makes things a lot easier. And there's just certain things, you know, with controller that can help speed up your creation process. Next thing we want to do is put inside of this spike trap, just win, start at 2, go to sensors, choose in trigger zone, and then say global player. So go to values, global, and values, object, player. And on the do side, we are going to say combat, kill, objects, it. This is something that we've used before. We use this inside of our goblin, except in this case, the goblin looked for when the player was in the trigger zone, it killed the goblin instead of kill it, which it refers to global player. Now when the global player goes inside of this trigger zone, it's going to die. Let's go into test and see that at work. Now we have to actually travel there first. Oh, looks like I didn't quite make the jump in time. Oh, look at that. I missed my jump. So that's looking kind of unforgiving, and that's something we can that's something you can kind of play around with and tweak to make those enemies a bit less unforgiving. But let's go ahead and fall down this little gap here. And perfect. Oh, we forgot that goblin was there. Let's jump down again. And that's great. So sometimes you see that you'll be blocked by those icicles or spikes, and sometimes you won't be. It kind of depends on where you land. Of course, if you want to make it so that you won't be able to fall through them, you'll notice that these spikes are pretty narrow right now. Very narrow path, so we might, for instance, want to take another version of these, bring this out over here, so we increase the Z depth, or X, I guess this would be on the X axis, so the X depth of it. That'll actually do it for this quick obstacle tutorial. We wanted to introduce the simplest of obstacles, which is just spikes. In our next tutorial, we're going to be looking at another obstacle, which is falling blocks.